Okay, everybody, we are ready to rock. Good morning. So I want to talk about 4 expectations for this keynote. And a lot of the times we talk about that we want to see student engagement without really recognizing and embracing what engagement entails. And when we think about engagement, it's equal parts attention and commitment. So it's not only that you're paying attention, but that you're willing to commit to the journey. And commitment, we know, requires productive struggle, and it requires the ability to self-regulate. And what that really translates to is engagement requires you to be uncomfortable. It's called cognitive dissonance. And when things are comfortable and you know everything, and I'm affirming everything you're already doing, you're not learning. And so what I want you to do is to commit to being uncomfortable, because we're going to talk about some pretty heavy, difficult things that need to be on the table when we're talking about changing our strategy and our systems. And so when you experience discomfort, you can retreat, you can rebel, or you can speak your truth. So I want us to be really honest with each other as we have these conversations this morning and talk about the fact that currently our systems are not meeting the needs of all students, and recognizing that we have to make some pretty systemic changes in order to make that happen. And in many ways, that requires that we grieve the loss of the system that we have. And so we're going to speak our truth, and then we're going to accept that this work takes a long time and takes a village to create. So you're not going to leave here after an hour keynote and be like, we are ready. Tomorrow the system is going to be totally different. Okay, there's going to be some non-closure, and you're going to have some questions, and that's why we have tools and you have a team with you to continue this journey. So I want to start off and talk about our beginnings, our humble beginnings here in the United States. I always thought that the United States was founded from people who just wanted freedom, and they were coming here to start a new life. And it turns out that's not accurate, because a historian from Louisiana State University wrote this book called White Trash, a 400-year untold history of class in America. And what I didn't know is that the country actually started based on this concept of exclusion, not inclusion. It wasn't people coming here that they wanted to be included. Jamestown Colony was a dumping ground to empty out all of the UK's prison systems. So their debtors' prisons and their criminal prisons. And what she says as a historian is that they saw North America as an empire to dump their human waste. And so this country, we have been told this history that this was a great place for people to feel included, when in fact, this was a place that people came because they were excluded. And so we have to look at a timeline of once people got here, what this privilege looked like. And again, we talk about, we have this Declaration of Independence and everyone is created equal. But the fact that we give power and privilege to those people who have a voice, for those people who have voting rights, tells a very different story. And so in 1789, okay, we signed the US Constitution. And the US Constitution basically changed the way that this country was built, as far as democracy, as far as capitalism. And it was really, really built on who had a voice. And the only people who had a voice for the first 100 years were white property-owning men who were 21 and older. And so when you think about all people are created equal, what you have to recognize is the privilege that white property-owning men had in making decisions for all of the rest of us. And also recognizing that for anybody else to get a voice, they had to allow it. And so when we think about the privilege that we have in our own jobs, in our own districts, we do have the power and the privilege and the voting right, if you would say, to allow more students to be included. So 100 years later, in 1870, we decide that we are going to extend those voting rights to all male citizens. So that included white men who did not own property, and in theory it included black men, and it definitely excluded Native Americans because they did not earn their right to vote for decades. But of these property or non-property owning men, there were 2 little barriers that you had to deal with. So if you were a black man, for instance, you could vote if you could do 2 things. Okay, check in with someone next to you, 15 seconds. What were the 2 things that would prevent a black man from voting? Ready? Check in, go, 15 seconds. 3, 2, and 1. There were two very significant barriers. There was a poll tax, and there was a literacy test. So when we say the right to vote is extended to all men, regardless of race or color or previous certitude, if they have the money to pay a poll tax and they have the education to pass a literacy test. Okay? Every state had their public education system intact by 1870. So remember who those systems were built under. By 1920, we had the 19th Amendment. The right to vote was extended to all citizens regardless of gender, but there was still a poll tax, and there was still a literacy test, and black women still could not vote. In 1924, Native Americans could vote. In 1964 is the Civil Rights Act of 1964, which finally allowed all Americans to vote. But we still had a poll tax, and there was still a literacy test. It took until 1966 when they struck down poll taxes. So when we finally said those people who are economically disadvantaged still have a voice. And it took until 1975 until we banned literacy tests. Many of us were alive then. So this concept of everyone has a voice is very, very biased and very historically inaccurate. And so take 30 seconds with a partner and check in about this timeline of privilege and timeline of voting. What does this, remind you of? What did you learn that you didn't know before? How do you want to react to it? Ready, go. 30 seconds. Okay. And 5, 4, 3, 2, and 1. So I'm going to change stories here because we started with a story of the history of our humble beginnings and a history of privilege when it comes to who really has a voice, who has the power to make changes, who has the power to have their voices heard. And I want to talk a little bit about my family now and switch gears. So I have this amazing, amazing family. My husband, Lon, is absolutely amazing. I met him on Match.com 15 years ago, which was when online dating was still really creepy. And we've made this life together, and we have these 4 amazing, amazing kids. My son, Torin, is 10. I have twin 9-year-olds, and then I have a 4-year-old little guy named Bowden. And so my daughter, Aylin, is probably the coolest human being in the world. Like, you have these kids, and you love them all the same, and they have all these strengths and weaknesses, but like, this kid was born on fire. Right? It's just, she's the coolest person. She was born wanting to give everybody a voice, and she wanted to fight for what she felt everybody deserved. Now, a great anecdote about Aylin happened to me last fall. We were walking in Groton, my hometown where I live, and I was with all of the kids, and it was me, and there was a squirrel in the road that had been hit by a car. And the squirrel was dying and suffering, but not yet dead. And it was disemboweled, and there were flies, and it was terrible. So my reaction as a mom was like, I want to shield my kids from this. And I'm like, come on, like, let's go, let's go. And Aylin's like, no, Mom, stop. You have to do something. And I'm like, sweetheart, like, I don't know what you want me to do. Like, that squirrel is dying. Honest to goodness, if I had a car, as much as it would have pained me, I would have tried to like run it over to like put it out of its misery. It was just terrible. And like, cars are going around it, and it's like there's this terrible high-pitched noise. It was awful. So she's like, Mom, I'm not walking. You have to do something. I'm like, Aylin, let's go. There's nothing we can do. And so she turns to her twin brother, Brecken, who's standing there in the top right-hand corner, and says, Brecken, give me your shirt. And so he takes off his shirt, and she walks her little self into the middle of the road, and she picks up that squirrel so kindly and so carefully, and tries to get his tummy back in, and has them all wrapped in like a t-shirt, and she's literally going like this, like the mama bounce, right? Like, it's okay, it's okay. And this is a picture of her petting its head, and I'm just like standing there in awe, taking pictures. And within 30 seconds, this squirrel dies in her arms. It's like this like amazing, peaceful thing that all of us get to experience. And she looked at me like I was like the biggest waste in the whole world, and she says, Mom, nothing should ever die alone. And that is a kid where I get her to be mine. She is a champion for equity. But there's another story I want to tell you about Aylin, which is she really struggles with mental illness. She has combined type ADHD, a mood disorder, anxiety. Right now she's in the middle of a neuropsych, and the psychiatrist actually called us and said, all of these results of this testing are really inconsistent. We don't really know what to do. And as a mom, like if you have anyone in your family with mental illness, you know how difficult this is. And so one of the things that I recognize about her is I see her for all her strengths. And what often happens is these kids with these amazing strengths and these assets go to school, and we only see them for their weaknesses. Because I am telling you, this is a kid who is tough to parent and a kid who is really tough to teach. Okay? She is not somebody who you'd see on your class list and be like, that kid is on fire. And so she knows this, she recognizes this. And so she knows what I do for a living. And so, a few months back, she called me and she was like really upset. And I said, what's going on, babe? What's going on? And she's like, mom, like she was upset. I mean, who knows, something. And so I said to her, I'm like, hey, listen, I literally can't talk right now. Like, I'm going to be talking to a bunch of principals and teachers and things. And she's like, about what? And I said, just about the fact that like all kids are amazing and all kids can learn. And she said, Mom, teachers don't like all kids. They only like the kids that are the same. I said, what do you mean? And she said, no one really likes kids that are different. And I said, would you be willing to record that for me and then send me a video? So this is a video of my sweet 8-year-old daughter, and thank you so much for letting me share this with you, about the way that she sees herself fitting into our system.
Some kids are the same and some kids are different. And teachers may not like kids. And I'm a different one. And I get left out a lot by my brothers and people in my class. And people yell at me and shove me sometimes, and I don't like it.
So we are creating a system for our children. And what I want to tell you about Aylin, to go back to this amazing fire that she has, is this is her best friend, James. I do have permission from his mom to share these amazing stories. And she loves James. And the reason that her and James became great friends is because when they were in kindergarten, James has Fragile X syndrome. He's nonverbal in many ways, and he gets really, really excited. And I get excited too, and it's hard to control my body. And so when he gets excited, he flaps his hands, I feel it sometimes. Like I want that excitement to come out. And he was on the playground and he was flapping his hands, and a bunch of little girls surrounded him in a circle and they started flapping their hands to imitate him. Why do you do this? And a recess aide was going to walk over to address this, obviously, and I heard this from that recess aide. But Aylin would not walk over for that. Aylin is going to run over for that. Like, that is unacceptable. And so she walks over and she says, hey, ladies. I'm going to work on the delivery. If you're going to mess with someone, you're all going to mess with me. And when they told the story, I'm like, am I supposed to be mad about that? I'm not sure what my reaction should be. But the reality is that James deserves high quality, amazing education with his peers. And Aylin deserves high quality education with her peers. And then her brother Brecken is the perfect, typical average student. He's compliant. He is at grade level. He's very bright. When he was in kindergarten and Aylin was starting fights on the playground, he came home and said, hey, Mom, what's division? And I'm like, buddy, it's like when you split things up. And I mean, as math teachers in here are cringing, that's a terrible example. And I said, okay, Breck, here we go. Let's say you have 4 friends over, right? And I am going to give you 8 M&Ms, 8 packages of M&Ms. How do you divide them? And that little pain in the neck says, I'd keep 4 for myself and give 1 to each of them. The math mentality was good, but I'm like, we need to work on sharing. But here's the thing. In Groton Dunstable, where I both work and live, these kids are assigned to the same class, right? They're in the same classroom. And when we talk about inclusion, that is what we mean. That every child has equal access to a general education classroom with their peers. And if we can't do that, we're not using inclusive practices, but I think the thing that we're not willing to say is that means we are excluding kids. So we always talk about inclusive practice like it's a good thing. But the reality is if we're not implementing inclusive practices, if we don't have equal access to high quality curriculum and high expectations, we are creating an exclusionary system, and these kids don't have a voice to change it. And most of the time, when that district doesn't work, when that class doesn't work, okay, and I'm a mom of both of these kids, okay, we say that it's not fair for Brecken to have to be in a class with them. Brecken shouldn't have to be educated with those other kids because we see them as different, and they are not different. They are them. That is their identity, and they deserve everything that Brecken gets. And that is the system that we have to create. And so as we think about how we're creating systems, we have to start somewhere. We have to recognize that that's not okay, and we have to start somewhere. And in Groton-Dunstable, we still have a long way to go. But I want to show you where we started, because all of us are coming from the same place. When you're looking at our students with disabilities in 2013, before we brought MTSS to the district, our PPI was at 29. Just to give you a frame of reference, the state at that point was at like a 52. Okay, now the PPI is not an indicator that we use, but I just want to show you this is what happens at the beginning. We brought MTSS to the district during the 14-15 school year. Myself and Dr. Kristen Rodriguez were the superintendent and assistant superintendent. In her resources session, she's going to show you a lot more data to dive into this. But in 2014, as you can see there, it was up to a 42, okay? And within 2 years of implementing MTSS, thinking about the scheduling, thinking about the professional development, thinking about the resource allocation, the state in this time period went from a 52 to a 50. Groton-Dunstable went from a 29 to a 79. We went up 50 points in PPI from really thinking strategically about how do we create a system so these kids have equal opportunities to learn. And so what I want you to think about here is another quick timeline, and that's the timeline of inclusion. In 1990, the Individuals with Disabilities Education Act was passed, and that is the beginning of inclusion. And what that meant was that every student had to be placed in the least restrictive environment available to them, and you had to start reporting your inclusion rates. So until 1990, students with disabilities could be put anywhere, and there was no accountability for where they were. And the IDEA required 3 things. Every school and district and state must report inclusion rates. Number 2 is you have to create a general education continuum of services where the least restrictive environment is always the general education inclusive classroom. And then the third thing was you could no longer say this kid needs special education. You had to say this is why we couldn't make general education work. So the flip was on the system. And so people started saying, okay, great, let's include students. And we started talking about co-teaching and differentiated instruction and universal design for learning. And 12 years go by, and we ask the question, how are these kids doing? And all you hear is flipping crickets because nobody knows. Because until No Child Left Behind, you didn't have to report data for subgroups. You could just say, all of our students, you know, like 60% are proficient. That's pretty good, right? Okay, but what about your students with disabilities? What about your Black and brown students? What about your Hispanic and Latino students, right? We have to start recognizing every voice matters. And when we do that, there are 2 things happen with No Child Left Behind: transparency and accountability. Transparency, you must tell us how every subgroup is doing. Accountability, if you can't make growth with those subgroups, there is going to be some sort of accountability for that. So I want you to talk about real quick, 30 seconds with your partner. Once we started reporting data for subgroups, what did we learn? Go. Okay. 5, 4, 3, 2, and 1. So the results were sobering. There were huge achievement gaps. We started talking about the black and white achievement gap, a pedagogy of poverty, curricular chaos, negotiated curriculum. And it made us recognize that we could no longer wait and react, that in fact we had to start being really proactive and really start getting data and evidence about students early and plan to provide them with supplemental support. And so in 2004, the RTI for Success Network came out of the reauthorization of IDEA. And we talked about this focus of that all students need to be Tier 1 students first. Every student should have access to a high-quality curriculum, inclusive teaching practices, but then some students are going to need more than that. We're going to have to supplement that. And so we need to determine what that supplemental support looks like. We're going to respond with intervention in addition to. And the idea behind this was brilliant. Okay? The students who need more get more, and they get it early. We don't wait for them to fail. You know, we do universal screeners and diagnostics and say, you know, what do these kiddos need to be successful? How are we going to close these gaps? But the system wasn't prepared to create an RTI system, okay, because we didn't have the schedule that allowed kids to get supplemental support. A lot of times we had to supplant that support. Or maybe we didn't have the staff competency to meet the needs of all students and provide that intervention. And so RTI, for 5 years, even though it was implemented, did very little to decrease achievement gaps and did quite a bit to decrease inclusion rates. We started excluding kids more through a system of RTI that was built so all students got core curriculum and then some students got more. And so in 2009, that's when the US Department of Education said, it's not that RTI isn't a brilliant, brilliant idea. It's the system was not built to support it well. You need these drivers of this system. You need really strong leadership. You need shared responsibility for all students. We have to talk about allocating resources and staffing. Teachers need to know how to meet the needs of kids in Tier 1 classroom. And other teachers need to know how to provide really effective specialized instruction and targeted assistance to kids through that Tier 2 and Tier 3 practice. So we have to build competency. And we need a really strong core curriculum so we truly have high expectations for all kiddos. Okay, and we need to make sure that we have a lot of different screeners and assessments to get a really robust picture of children. And that's how we're going to make sure that we can close those gaps while also promoting the importance of inclusion. And that brings us to where we are today with the signing of the Every Student Succeeds Act. Okay, Race to the Top was 2012, which again, it's folded in those standards in a very rigorous ed-eval system. And then the Every Student Succeeds Act said that every state must create an MTSS plan, and they endorsed universal design for learning as a way to eliminate barriers to both the system and the classroom. So that is where we find ourselves today. We believe in eliminating the inequities of the achievement gap while still promoting inclusion. We do that by focusing on very high standards for all students, and we do that by making sure that we're really focused on targeting those drivers on the outside. So I want to give you a couple of minutes to think about this. Now that you know a little bit more about the history of inclusion and exclusion, okay, what are the areas that you need to think about if you truly want to serve all students all the time? Take 2 minutes. All right. And 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. So in my heart, I know that we're not intending to create exclusionary systems. That is not the intent, okay? But the reality is if we look at the impact of the system on our students, okay, it tells a very different story than our intent. And so we have to ask ourselves, are we valuing impact over intentions? So I want to show you a slide. Now remember, this was all about being uncomfortable and embracing that discomfort, because we have to embrace that discomfort and speak our truth if we're going to make a change in the system. And again, I always go back to, we do have the power and privilege to make those changes as a part of a distributed leadership model, and students don't have a voice in making those changes. We have to be the voice to allow all students to have access to really high quality curriculum, really high quality inclusive teaching, and then again, a system that meets their needs when they need things. So yesterday, Dr. Irving Scott showed a picture of the data in 2016 in a district in North Carolina. This is the current Massachusetts 2019 achievement data that is on the public website for the district profile. And this is the next generation MCAS grades 3 through 8. So the 10th grade scores are not a part of these numbers. And so the purple color, the one on the left, is the number of students in grades 3 to 8 ELA who are meeting or exceeding grade level standards. So you'll see all students is riding right about 50%. And then you have your students with disabilities, your English learners, your economically disadvantaged, your African American Black students, your Hispanic Latino students, Asian students, and white students. And then there are these two other categories. I want you to take a minute and reflect on what that data says, okay? And what questions you have about this chart. Ready? 20 seconds, go. Does anyone have like a really burning question about this slide? What is T and A, right? T and A are flipping killing it. Those are teachers and administrators. So let's think about this for a second. And I am saying this as a fellow administrator, and I want to look at this through systems thinking, because I elevate and celebrate all the work that teachers are doing. There is no better job in the universe. It was my favorite job ever. And I love teachers, okay, and I want to fight for teachers, but I also need to fight for kids. So let's unpack this a little bit. There's something that's called a minimum threshold, which means that you cannot be proficient unless you are proficient as a teacher in curriculum planning and assessment and teaching all students. And as an administrator, you can't be proficient unless your overall rating cannot be proficient unless you have been proficient on instructional leadership. So let's talk about what does teaching all students mean. Okay, the new Teaching All Students standard in the new EdEval rubric, starting in August of 2018, added a student learning indicator, among other things like the expectations. Do we have high expectations for all students? Do all students have access to knowledge at grade level with really high quality curriculum? Okay, do we really meet the needs of our diverse kids? And so the student learning indicator, which is the newest edition, asks us to consider a teacher's impact on student learning, and this comes directly from the rubric, and it talks about that there has to be multiple measures of student learning, growth, and achievement. So the question that I want to grapple with from a system perspective, okay, because we have to look at impact over intentions, is how can 97% of administrators and educators be proficient at teaching all students when less than 50% of students are proficient, and when you're looking at some of our more marginalized populations, it's less than 20%. Take a minute and just reflect and speak your truth and grapple with that discomfort. And I want to tell you, I am a part of this with you. I struggle with this as well. So just take a minute and talk about it. This might be a question that keeps us all up at night. It's hard to stop talking about it. Just so you know, quick announcement is the slides are in the folder. If some of you are having a tough time seeing from the back, you can have access to the slides that way. So again, we talk about inclusive practice. We talk about creating a multi-tiered system so all students can be successful. You know, all means all. And to do that, when we look at data like this, we have to really start thinking about what do we need to change in the system. Okay, because instructional leadership is recognizing what professional development do teachers really need to meet the needs of all students. So this isn't like a pointing fingers, it's just that there's an inequity between the number of students who are doing well and the number of educators that are doing well. And we have to ask ourselves, what about the system created that inequity and how do we fix it? Now, I want to dive into something where we talk about mindset, because a lot of the times we have this kind of implicit mindset when we look at data like that, and it's like, well, that's, you know, the way things are. You know, we're trying really hard, like this is good enough. And a part of this is really recognizing our own mindset about what we believe our students are capable of. And that is really, in some ways, negotiated by our own identity. And so Elise Fertura is a researcher in Wisconsin. She's at the University of Wisconsin. And she talks about like understanding your own identity. Yesterday, Irving talks about you have to understand your leadership style, but you have to also understand your own identity. And all of us have a mindset, or we fall within a spectrum of thinking about these different groups that are protected classes. And so, when we look at this, a lot of people say, why do we have these long arrows? And we have these long arrows because, like, when it comes to race, when it comes to gender, we have thoughts or beliefs about different groups. So when we have those thoughts or beliefs, they're either going to be a deficit-based belief or an asset-based belief. And so when you think about what that is, I want you to think about that spectrum as being the numbers 1 through 6. That is a hot QR code if you want to go to Elise Fertura's actual work, which is an activity that you could do with your staff on their own on their own identity development. But when you're thinking about deficit-based mindset, I want you to think about the numbers 1, 2, and 3, which are like repulsion and fear, pity and neutrality. And then your asset-based mindsets are going to be your acceptance, your admiration, and then being an ally, ultimately. And so when you're thinking about this, what we know is that some students are experiencing marginalization. Okay, we see the data. And what we know is that when we have a deficit-based view of students, okay, we're going to have lower expectations for them. When we feel bad for kids, we're going to lower our expectations. If we're scared of kids, we're going to lower our expectations. When we don't see the really unique, beautiful identity that they bring to the table, we're going to lower our expectations. And when we lower our expectations, we often place students in remedial learning. That's why the foundation of MTSS is all students, Tier 1, strong core curriculum, inclusive practices, and then more if they need more. But oftentimes we don't supplement that support, we supplant that support. We label kids and we put them in remedial learning. Okay, we say, they can't do it anyway, we feel bad. Or like, that's not fair to the other kids. And so we move them. Remedial learning perpetuates school failure, period, end of story. If you don't have access to high quality teaching and learning with grade level curriculum, you are not gonna close those gaps. But the reality is that a lot of the times it comes down to expectations and beliefs. So let's just take, for instance, I am a woman. And so, when you think of women, certainly there's some people who are like repulsed by women. That's like a very strong statement. And then some are like, oh, I'm so glad I'm not a woman. I feel so bad for women. And then it's like, I don't even notice if you're a woman or a man, right? But I want to tell you something that I hear often. And I want you to tell me what number that's an example of. Okay, so I am a .8 assistant superintendent of schools, so I'm in the district about 200 days a year, and that leaves me, other 61 days to be able to do really amazing things like this. And I travel sometimes, and one of the things that has been said to me numerous times when I travel is people will come up to me and they'll say, gosh, I don't know how you do it. You have 4 kids, you're an assistant superintendent, like that's amazing. I could never leave my kids like that. Okay, talk about it. What number are you putting me at there? Ready, go, quick. My brilliant, amazing husband, Novak, is an outside sales rep. He travels all the time. Has anyone ever said to him, ever, in the William of the word, right? Who's watching your kids? How can you leave your kids? Oh, I could never leave my kids. Everyone's like, oh, you must be psyched that your kids are at home and you're not. And I'm like, oh my gosh, right? But it's this like, and the reason I use that example, which is it's very surface, but it shows like how deep this identity goes, our beliefs about people. So now let's get into the dirt. Let's look at students with disabilities, okay? We have some students who are very medically fragile, that have significant behavioral challenges, and they might, strike out at teachers. And, we have kids who, require feeding and require diapering, and you sometimes end up with teachers who are like, I can't teach those kids. I don't even know what to do. Like, I'm not a special educator. They can't be in my class. It's almost like I'm repulsed by the child. And the child deserves humanity. This is somebody's baby. And every child deserves access to a really high quality education. They don't have to deserve it by meeting our expectations of what we feel like a student should be. Another thing, the fear, again, like with my own daughter, who really struggles with mental illness, is if she doesn't get her way, she'll explode. So asking her to push her to be a warm demander can be a dangerous thing because you're scared of her reaction. But if you're scared of her reaction, you're never going to push her. And then she's never going to learn, right? And so you end up with this, I feel bad. Okay, I hear this all the time. The kid just can't do it. There's no way the kid can read that, I feel bad. Okay, provide audio, provide scaffolding, like act it out, give visuals, universally design it. But do not say the kid can't do it. You don't know what the kid can do. You do not know what my daughter can do. And every kid that you say can't do it has somebody who is trying to fight for them the best they know how. And so when we think about this, I don't want our kids in remedial learning. I want our practices to be inclusive. And to do that, we have to change that mindset of pity to a mindset of admiration. It's not, oh my gosh, I feel so bad you don't know English. It's, you know what? What a privilege that you will be bilingual. That is a privilege. Okay? It's not like, oh my gosh, like this kid is transitioning genders, that's so hard. It's, I am so proud of you for choosing to be who you are, even though not everyone's going to understand that. That is powerful. That is braver than I will ever be. You are privileged, right? We need to admire what these kids bring to the table. And the reality is when we do that, we say, I will fight to make this work in my classroom. I will fight to make sure these kids are included in my district. And that is what an ally does. And so we have to move away from, I'm scared of the kid can't do it, the neutrality of, I don't even notice. I'll teach anyone. I don't notice their disabilities. I don't notice if a student is black or white. Well, then you're erasing their identity because that's a beautiful, beautiful part of what makes them amazing. And you have to see them for who they are, or you will never be linguistically and culturally responsive. You see it, you admire it, and then you fight for them to get everything that they deserve because you have the power and the privilege to do that. So take a moment and just reflect, okay? Look at these images, think about this mindset, and we have to start speaking our truth when people say, but they're just not gonna make it here. They just can't do the work. And the response is, what can the system do so they can do the work? Because every kid comes to us with an amazing mix of strengths and weaknesses, but we have to start seeing those strengths. So reflect on this slide just for a minute, and then we're going to come back together. So when we say all students all the time, we have to create opportunities that do not replicate the exclusionary systems that have been built. We have to change the system. Okay, we're not pointing fingers at anybody. Everybody has the power to change the system. And that's why MTSS is so important, and that's why we're here. You know, we're here because we deserve to create, our kids deserve for us to create a system that sees them, okay, that holds high expectations for all of them, and that truly provides growth and opportunity and achievement for our kids. And to do that, we have to value our impact over our intentions. Okay, we can't just keep saying, but we're trying, because that's not good enough. And then we have to identify and eliminate the barriers in the system through strategic planning. And we have so many tools about creating those plans, because we have to ask ourselves, what do we have to do differently leadership-wise? What competency and mindset changes do we need to build in our colleagues? And how can we support that? Because change is really difficult. Okay, again, you have to grieve the loss of the system that you have. Okay, and ultimately you have to do this through a lot of resource allocation and scheduling. But the journey is absolutely necessary, and it's absolutely worth it. So, you know, I want to ask you one final question, and then there's only one slide after this, which is, we do have the power and the privilege to design a new system. Okay, we have that voting power. But who are we going to allow in our system? Okay, we have a choice. We can create an inclusive system where every kid is successful. They're equally challenged, they're equally supported, they get what they need when they need it, academically, behaviorally, socially, emotionally. And we do that by being trauma-informed and linguistically and culturally responsive to kids. And if that feels like, gosh, that's too many things, that is the job. That is what it means to teach all students. And so what I want you to think about here is speak your truth with people around you if you're comfortable. Feel free to send a tweet. If you'd rather just kind of write some notes, that's okay. But we're going to enjoy a little Billie Holiday for a minute as you think about this question. Answer the question if you're comfortable, and then there's one more slide. Okay? Go. This work is about children. And we have to believe in a system that includes all students. So I want to end with just a story of something that happened to me with another system that doesn't meet the needs of everybody, which is our mental health system. And when my daughter was really, really struggling, she was very, very violent, and we had the baby at home, and she was really acting out. We went to a doctor and basically said, I don't know what to do. We take her to counseling. We have a behaviorist. Like, what are we supposed to do here? And so she put her on medication. She was about 6 years old, which is a little young to start some pretty serious medication, but she started it. And things got worse. Okay, it was not a good look. And so after about like 2 or 3 weeks, I had called a couple of times, and there was one incident where Bowden, who was a baby at the fact, she got really mad. She hit him. And so I called the doctor and I was like, can I please have an appointment? Can I please have an appointment? I need to change this medication. And they're like, I'm sorry, we don't have an appointment for like 6 weeks. I'm like, but I have a baby at home. Like, I have a baby that is less than a year old. My daughter is amazing. This is just true dysregulation. This is biological. I need your help. They said the only way that we will see her is if you bring her to the emergency room and they say that I have to see her. And I was like, I'm not doing it. It kept getting worse. I'm like, okay, I'll play this game. I'll go to the emergency room. So I go to the emergency room, and she's fine. I'm like, sweetie, mommy needs help. We're just going to go to the emergency room. She's like, okay. So we're reading books. We're sitting in a table together. They come in. They say, what happened? I said, she's been really violent. She would open up a window that's third story and be mad and say, I'm going to jump out. And I honestly don't know if she will. It's those kind of reactions. And so I explained to her. He leaves. They're like, we're going to have to call the mental health team to come in. I'm like, okay, do whatever you have to do. Just give me a note so I can go and deal with this medicine. And so I go through this rigmarole. And then these people come in, and they're like, we need to talk to you alone. And I'm like, yeah, okay. They're like, so we found a place for her to get treatment. I'm like, okay, that's great. They're like, we're going to take her right now. I'm like, okay, cool. I'll have my husband pick up the car. They're like, you can't come. I'm like, wait, time out? And they said, we got her a bed at this place. It's a 2-week residential, but you can't come. And I was like, well, then we're not doing that. There's 0% chance you are taking my 6-year-old who is coloring next to me away from me. You will not do it. And they're like, there's no way you're going to be able to fix this on your own. You're not going to be able to handle this. And then they made me start questioning that. I literally was like, am I hurting my daughter? Right? But the system was never about helping me work with her. The system was, there's no way you can do it, let's take her away. And I just see so many similarities between, as a mom, I will do anything. Build my competency to help her, okay? When she needs help, give her help, okay? And I'm like a smart person who's ready to fight, and I just felt like, you know what? Maybe I can't. And I called my husband, and he's like, do not speak to anybody. I will be there in 2 minutes. No one is taking our daughter. And I just always think of that, of we've just created this world that when people are different, we think, well, they've got to go somewhere else. And that's not a world that I want to create. And so we didn't do it. Eventually the doctors agreed to see us. She's on some great medication now. She's doing wonderful. But it's just this thought of you have to fight to keep the kids included, like I would fight to keep my daughter. Okay? Because that is somebody's baby. Okay? And don't let any system take them away from what they need to be successful. Don't let them take them away from the relationships with their peers and teachers, because they deserve so much better. So I'm going to end with this amazing video from Aylin, because she's doing so great right now. And this is this morning. I said, I'm talking today. I said, I'm going to talk to some principals and some teachers, and we're just talking about changing systems. I said, do you want to record a little ditty here? And so this is Aylin giving you your inspiration for the day.
To every teacher and principal and superintendents, if your kids are having a hard time, you can do it. You can make them better. You can persevere, and they can persevere. Every kid is amazing. Even every kid in the school, even if they're having a hard time, they still can do it, and you can make them teach better.
So as a mom, as an educator, as a leader, as somebody who's in the trenches with you, I beg you to fight with me. Thank you.